Philippines here. Now, we're going to branch out a little bit today and we're going to talk about someone whom you probably have never heard of, but who is immensely important. So let's start. The gentleman in question's name is Robert Briffault, or Robert Briffault, and he lived from 1876 until 1948. It's not actually clear whether he was French or of French extraction, but we do know that he spent the later part of his life in the United Kingdom, in England. He started off as a surgeon. He trained as a doctor, became a surgeon, got bored with surgery, and became an anthropologist, and later became a successful novelist. So we're talking about a guy here who had a very interesting life, a very interesting polymath, really. Now, he wrote a book called The Mothers, and The Mothers was a very seminal piece of anthropology. And in that book, he expressed a thing that has become known as Briffault's law. In a way, it's more of a paradigm, but we'll stick with law. And here is what Briffault's law actually says. Where the female can derive no benefit from association with the male, no such association takes place. And when Briffault talks about association here, he means a sexual one, right? So what he's saying is that essentially females are the gatekeepers to sex, and in this case we're talking about women, but they will not have sex unless they see a benefit to, a material benefit, a tangible, he calls it a tangible benefit to the act of having sex. And this tangible benefit, let's be quite clear, is above and beyond the sheer physical pleasure of sex itself. Men tend to be entirely focused on the pleasure of sex. But for women, sex has consequences that men are not really, they don't really think in terms of. Women get pregnant and men don't. Men can just have as much sex as they like, and the worst that's going to happen to them is they might get hit with a paternity suit, or perhaps their father-in-law's club 10,000 years ago. But the fact is that women, every time they have sex, prior to the invention of contraception, of course, every time they had sex, there was a very strong possibility that they would get pregnant. And so that made women think about sex in a very different way. And that's innate. That's not conditioned. That's the way women are. Human children are not even capable of being moderately independent until they're 12, 13 years old. And even then, they're not able to survive outside an organized social structure. So for us to get our young to continue our genes, which we must do, that's the whole point of us being here, then we must have systems in place which protect the children. That's the whole point. And women are keenly aware of this because, after all, they're the ones who have the children. And a child for a mother, therefore, is a responsibility that will last certainly 15 years. In a way that it doesn't necessarily for a man. And I'm not saying that men don't care about their kids. That's a different thing. That's not what we're talking about. But I'm saying that for women, sex has a very direct, immediate set of consequences. It's life-changing, or potentially life-changing anyway, in ways that it just isn't for men. It just isn't, Women are aware of the consequences of sex in a way that men just simply are not. And there's no real way around that. So to go back to Briffault's law, when the women can derive no benefit from association with the male, or sex with the male, no such association will take place. And what that basically says is, when women permit sex, because they're the gatekeepers, the way it works in human society, we're not like birds, for example. In human society, women attract, men pursue. But women are the gatekeepers, right? So they are the ones who decide which men they'll have sex with and when, right? Men do the pursuing, but they may well be rebuffed. And men get very used to this. It's just a fact of life, Some women don't want to have sex with you. Your wife doesn't want to have sex with you every day. But it's her who makes these decisions, not you. And that's the way it is. That's the way humans have always been. That's what was observed by Briffault. This basic law is really simple enough, but it comes with a number of corollaries. which are actually logically, they follow logically from the original, but we'll go through them anyway. The first one is Corollary 1. Even though the woman has accrued past benefit from her relationship with a man, this is no guarantee of her continuing the relationship with the man. And this has actually been expressed in modern terms as, what have you done for me lately? And what that means is that women are constantly observing their male partners to see if they're still continuing to provide the level of tangible benefit that the woman would like them to. And if they're not, then they may shut off the supply of sex, or they may, in fact, go elsewhere. A nice little article on this in Psychology Today added a very illuminating sidelight, which I'll go into here. And it says that in economics there's a concept of diminishing marginal unit utility, right? Which means that the value of, or the benefit derived from a product lessens with each successive unit consumed. And it goes into examples. But what that basically means is that as time goes by, women will want more tangible benefit for the supply of sex that they have, or that they give, right? If you went and dug some potatoes, and that was enough to get you, your sexual reward for the day, then in a couple of years' time, that might well not be enough. She'll be demanding more by that stage. Essentially, Briffault posits that women derive diminishing marginal utility from their relationships with men after they acquire the desired benefits. So, you give your wife a house and a car, whatever, and suddenly you find that she's rationing sex. And you go, why are you doing that? I've given you all the things that surely you've asked for. Why is there suddenly an issue here? And the issue is that she needs more. She constantly needs more. I didn't write this, by the way. This is lifted directly from the Psychology Today site. That bit is, anyway. And so what that means is that the demanded tangible benefit for a given level of sexual reward must increase through time, okay? As the woman perceives herself as receiving less marginal utility, or it must mean that for the same amount of tangible benefit, less sex will be delivered in return, okay? And so this explains two things. Women's well-known need for increasing material reward in a relationship. A new car, a bigger house, holidays in the sun, private education for the kids, this sort of thing. It also explains why many men live in practically sexless lives, because they've actually reached the point of their earning potential where they can't afford to increase the amount of reward they give to their wives. And so the wife says, okay, so I'll reduce the amount of sex. So once men reach that stable economic plateau, above which they will not earn more money, basically that's what we're looking for. In the past it would have been something else, but now we're talking about money, then the supply of sex they get, the amount of sex they get, must diminish. It must, if Briffault is right, and he is. And corollary 2 is any agreement where the male provides a current benefit in return for a promise of future association is null and void as soon as the male has provided that benefit, right? What that basically means is you buy her dinner on the assumption that you'll get sex later, but she doesn't have to give you the sex. And that's the way it works, because a woman gets to choose, which is fair enough. But this is the technique that women use in order to manipulate men, or it's one of them. And corollary 3 states that a promise of future benefit has limited influence on current stroke future association, with the influence inversely proportionate to the length of time until the benefit will be given, and directly proportionate to the degree to which the female trusts the male. So you promise her a new house next year. If that doesn't show up, then there are likely to be big problems in the future, and she will not trust you. So that if you say, no, it's okay, it'll be next year, not this year, it'll be next year, then she ain't going to believe you. And your supply of sex will just go through the floor. So This really explains, in very simplistic terms, the nature of women's relationship to men. But there is a problem with this. The system was evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, and it's not entirely suited to the way that people live today, the modern life in cities, the way that we live now. And it, as a result, can have very unforeseen or unforeseeable consequences. So Briffault managed to encapsulate with remarkable intuition how sex is turned by women into a currency that can be exchanged for tangible benefit. You know, it comes down to, okay, I need some wood for the fire and I need you to rebuild the shelter so that, because it's going to rain tonight. If you get that sorted out, then we'll see about it. And that's how it works. It's the way that the women use sex in order to get men to do things for them, right, is really well expressed by Briffault. And as I say, this will increase through time. The demands will increase through time. But that has a consequence because it affects the way that men see sex. They're going to start to see it or understand it as something that they get in exchange for tangible benefit, right? So it ceases to be, you know, this idea of the perfect romantic love. It becomes very pragmatic, nuts and bolts. The woman wants something, the man gives her that thing, she gives the man sex. So it becomes essentially a currency. Sex becomes a currency with which women buy favour and tangible benefit, right? And they have complete control over it. That's a really important point, that for this to work, women must have total control over the supply of sex. A complication is that men are actually interested in other things than sex. They're not just interested, men are interested in sex, we all are. I mean, let's be honest. Sex is fun, it's enjoyable, it gives us affirmation and reward as well as physical pleasure. We like sex, but it's not the only thing we like. You might like going to football, you might like playing football, you might like driving motorcycles, I do, sailing yachts, I do. You might like fast cars, you might like reading books, you might like the work that you do. There's a whole range of things that compete with your desire for sex, for your time. In addition, men live less long lives than women. Men are the risk takers. It's dangerous to be a man, much more dangerous than it is to be a woman. And men know that. The consequence of all of these things is that men value time. Time becomes very important for men in a way that isn't so much for women. What women really value is power over others. They want to be able to control the society around them. They want to be in charge. And that's much more important to them than notions of time, which they see as abstract. So we have two paradigms going on here. One is expressed by Briffault, and it is the exchange of sex for tangible benefit. And for men, it is the relationship between tangible benefit and time. Let's put it a different way. For women, sex is money, but for men, time is money. Now, yes, they want sex, but there are other things they might want. And in addition, there are many, many shops that hoard sex in the same way as men hoard time. That's why men are so constantly time obsessed, you know. They invented timesheets, for goodness sake. Women use sex to buy tangible benefits, including control over men. Men use labour, and labour can be expressed, remember, in terms of time to buy sex. So there you have the two paradigms. One is buying sex, and the other one is basically selling sex. So essentially, Briffault's law and women, and it's an observation of the way women behave. Women turn all relationships with men, every single one, all of them, into John-whore relationships, because the woman is always selling sex and the man is always buying it. And even though this might be done in a very loving context, and I'm not arguing about that, there's still this transactional nature to sex which is encapsulated by Briffault, and you can't get around that one. The main thing that ties a man, a particular man, to a particular woman, traditionally at least, was children. Men are as invested in having their genetic line continue as women are. But there's a big problem. Women always know which children are actually theirs. I mean, that's an easy one. Men can never be sure. Until the advent of modern blood testing and DNA testing systems, you could never really be sure if a particular child was yours. You had to take the woman's word for it. What that means is that men are less... There is an imperative on men to have as much sex as possible in order to reproduce. And they're less tied than women would like them to be. If men think that maybe those children aren't really mine, he might well be likely to think about having sex with someone else. And this has an effect because inside a man's head, there's a kind of algorithm that's going, well, I need to expend X amount of time, or its equivalent, in order to do the things that you want me to do and before you'll have sex. But there's a problem, because you're not the only woman on the planet. And maybe there's a woman down the road there who's kind of cute, you know, and she's quite, I think she'd give me sex for a lot less, you know. I could just go there and do that. And that is really difficult for women to deal with. More likely to be a problem as the woman ages and loses her looks, and the value of her sexual reward diminishes. Now, people who do MGTOW talk about the wall which women allegedly hit at 35. I'm not quite so sure it's as strict as that. But the fact is that as women get older, the value of their sexual reward does diminish. And what will happen is that the men they're associated with will start to look with greater interest at much younger women. Now, that means that women have to take whatever steps they can to prevent their men from having sex with younger women, and at the same time to prevent younger women from being available for sex with older men. And in the West, they typically do this by shaming techniques. We might go on that another time. The issue is that when men have unlimited access to sex, it's a sexual free market, it's not controlled, then Briffault collapses. Because if you're in a situation where your wife says, I'm not having sex with you tonight, you know, I've got a headache, or I've got a business meeting tomorrow, or whatever, and you go, well, screw it then, I'll just go down and see that lassie down the road, and she'll sort me out. The woman's power over the man completely evaporates. It's just gone, right? Remember, he can't really be sure that the children they make together are even his. And we live in a world today where women increasingly simply don't have children, which means that they really don't have anything to keep men attached to them other than somewhat pie-in-the-sky notions of romance and bada-bada-bada. And so what they're doing is they try and shame men. It's constant. All relationships between men and women have a sexual component, all of them. It always happens. It's always there. The only time that might not happen is between a man and a lesbian female, or between a female and a feminine homosexual man. You know, that would be between straight people and inverts. So in these situations, there probably isn't any. There's no sexual tension, and that's probably why certainly I'm like this, and I know many men are. They find lesbians, butch lesbians, very easy to get on with. You know, because they're just like guys, except there's no, there's no competitive element in the relationship. And so it's fine, you know. There's no sexual tension. But any time that a straight man is dealing in any way whatsoever with a woman, then there is sexual tension. There is a sexual component to that relationship. And this is why women constantly try to ban things like pornography and prostitution. They don't care two hoots about the girls who are doing the sex work. They just don't care. They don't care about their kids, they don't care about the women. What they care about is the fact that the control that they want to establish over the supply of sex is broken by this. Because if a man can just put his hand in his wallet and say, oh, here's 30 quid, Briffault totally collapses. It's gone. A woman's control over men has evaporated as soon as this element is introduced into society. And so women are constantly attempting to shame men for using things like pornography, for using prostitutes, all of which are completely natural and normal things to do. And what we end up with, therefore, is the thing that I call the Soviet Union of sex, in which the suppliers of sex attempt to be totally in control of the market. If you understand economics at all, then you understand that that's not how it's meant to work. The supplier and the consumer are meant to have equal levels of input. You know, I won't buy what you're selling, right, because your price is too high, which means that the supplier has to reduce the price, okay? And that's the power of the consumer, which is very, very important. Feminists, applying Briffault without saying so, attempt to remove that power from the consumer. They attempt to say, well, no, you can't buy sex from anyone other than the legitimized partner that we have said it's okay for you to have sex with. And she will then be in control of the amount of sex that you get. That's how Briffault works. And this is really, really important stuff. If you want to try to understand why there is such a problem between men and women today, and I'm not just talking about the radical feminists, because I mean basically they're idiots, but this is spread out into the broader society. And one main reason is that women are not having children. So without children, Briffault becomes very tenuous. You know, if you don't have children and there are a lot of women competing for male attention, then Briffault starts to collapse. You don't have the attraction of the man being attracted back to his own children, which is very, very important to men. You know, it's now considered appropriate for women not to have children till they're 35. So what binds a man to a woman in a situation like that? Especially if that woman is reducing or has reduced the amount of sex that's available. You know, he's not got kids and he's not getting sex. He's going to go down the road and buy in another shop. That's what's going to happen. Now, interestingly enough, we can back this up statistically. Surveys have found that one study carried out in the USA of 26,000 couples, they found that the average amount of sex that was occurring in these couples was 54 times a year, or once a week, more or less. And in another study, it was found that this was approximately the minimum required to ensure the well-being of both partners, but particularly the male. So for the relationship to survive at all, there is a kind of baseline which is required in sex, which is roughly once a week. And amazing number of Western relationships now are at that level. And the reason is because of feminism and women moving away from the traditional roles that they had. Obviously, men have other alternatives. They could masturbate, they could simply give up sex. And a lot of middle-aged guys, you know, there is no such thing as the male menopause. It doesn't exist. There is a slow decline in testosterone, but it's absolutely minute. You know, you don't need to worry about that. But what happens is that men, if they're constantly being knocked back by their partners, so they're constantly being told, no, not tonight, tomorrow, Josephine, and all the rest of the nonsense that you get, next week, or you're 10 minutes too early, you're 10 minutes too late, all that kind of stuff. Eventually they just give up on sex, they stop having sex. You know, and what that means is that women's power over them has completely vanished, because you cannot coerce anyone into doing something if what you're offering no longer interests them. You know, you'll be talking here about women who probably, let's put it this way, their sexual market value has probably gone down drastically anyway, and they have conditioned you to think that, well, no, the most likely result of an approach for sex is an embarrassing knockback, and so men will go, oh, forget it, I won't bother. And for a while they might masturbate, they might chase other women, and some will simply just give up on sex. And that's what the male menopause actually is. Briffault's law, his observation, these exist because of the risk of pregnancy and the need for women to be protected in order to ensure that their children reach maturity. And humans have evolved incredibly complex systems to do this, which are based sort of initially on the human pair bond, but are also based on other interpersonal bonds which exist principally between women. You know, clans and tribes are basically bound together by women, not by men. Okay? And this is one way that women have evolved, or humans have evolved, a robust structure which exists to protect children and ensure that they reach sexual maturity. You know, as I say, most, you know, humans get to be sexually mature about the age of 13, 14, depending, you know, it's in their early teens, early to mid-teens. And they will start having children at that point themselves, even, you know, unless there's some social imperative that stops them doing it. And that's one of the consequences of an organised society, that sex is basically rationed, that young women who are not ready to take on the responsibility of mothers are put off limits. That's the whole point of virginity in marriage. It was that it's not sort of control of women's sexuality, which is just more feminist nonsense. It's in order to protect women, is to say, look, we know that you're not capable yourself of looking after these children because you're only 13. So what we'll do is we will sanction you. We'll say, you know, you can't have sex until you're significantly older and are married to a man who will look after you, right? And then when you then are, you know, a little bit older and you're more capable of looking after children, it's all okay. The society says yes, it binds a man to you to look after you, and then you can go ahead and have sex and have babies. And that's how it works. Sex has a cost for women that it simply doesn't have for men. And essentially what's happened through the countless eons of human history is that women have attempted to ease their own burden by spreading it outwards, partly onto their own female relatives, the older ones whose children are already grown up, but mainly to the men, to their partners. They're expected to do the heavy lifting. It's not, by the way, to say that women don't enjoy the act of sex. Of course they do. Women love sex. But there's another thing going on inside the head of a woman as she approaches sex. And it's always that concern. Now, we've had contraception for, well, the first effective contraceptive pills appeared in 1960. Now, that's not enough time for significant changes to have evolved into human behaviours. So even though women have much less risk of getting pregnant if they're on contraception than they would have had in 1950, say, or before, for hundreds, thousands of years beforehand, they still have the same mindset.